Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Wrestling Doesn't Make Sense, where me and John talk about professional wrestling and how much sense it makes. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense, sometimes not so much, and that's good for us because it gives us something to talk about. So recently on the WWE Network, they did a little kind of feature.
A documentary.
Yeah, like a documentary on, well, clearly it's by Triple H. I feel like this is like part one of like many on Triple H maybe, but it was highlighting the Triple H versus Cactus Jack storyline from the beginning of the year 2000, which is a storyline that I'm very familiar with. I'm very, very much in love with.
Oh yes.
Because I'm a big fan of both those guys. A bigger fan of Mick Foley, and I actually started watching wrestling like right after Mick Foley retired.
Oh, no way.
I think I started in like April or May of 2000. So it was like right after WrestleMania. And I had no idea. And then this guy was on screen, Commissioner Foley. I'm like, I like the look of this guy. He seems funny. And then I find out, as you do, you find out, because I got his book that year, I think, 2000. So that I was like, oh, he was Mankind. Wow. I wonder what kind of shenanigans he got up to. So then, as a kid, you go back on VHS tapes. You have to go and buy VHS tapes of like the collections that the WWE will put out.
Mm-hmm.
So I got like Mick Foley, Hard Knocks, and Cheap Pops on VHS.
What about the Three Faces of Foley one? Did you get that one?
I did, yeah, but I think I wanted Hard Knocks and Cheap Pops more because that was I can't remember what was on either of them though, but I had them both for sure. And I was very happy with this. And then you actually get to see the guy wrestle and you're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Whoa, this guy, man, he doesn't mind jumping off a thing or two to get his point across, So I was very happy and excited to watch this little documentary. What did you think about it?
I really enjoyed it. I think, well, first of all, it goes without saying, like WWE have been really knocking it out the park in terms of their like network content, like these little documentaries and little look backs at the past and stuff that they've been doing recently have been really, really good. Like case in point, their whole Undertaker Last Ride documentary series they got going on as well right now is something everyone should be watching. But yeah, this one, like you say, it was from a period where like I'd been watching or started watching WWE again for like the last 2 years before this. And was sort of clued up on the fact that Mick Foley was heading towards the end of his career.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like Triple H was still a guy at this point who, because he was still coming out the DX days, he wasn't really being taken seriously as like a main event heel so much. But then like the whole thing with like him, marrying Stephanie and that whole comedic kind of, it was comedic, but it was also kind of a dastardly heel move as well, like roofing her and taking her to Vegas.
It's definitely more on the heel side, I feel.
Yeah.
Just because he's cracking jokes about it doesn't necessarily mean it's just because he's very flippant in attitude about having kidnapped and drugged a girl to then go and get married to her, but technically without her consent. I would say that is definitely more on the villainous side than the humorous side.
Yeah, I'm not encouraging anyone to go out there and do that. But
wow, unless you really want to marry into a specific business.
Yeah, you could say it paid off with Triple H, but
yeah, he worked out pretty well for that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like this whole like these whole two matches were something that really stood out from this era of WWE at a time where I believe Stone Cold Steve Austin was injured. I'm not sure what The Rock was doing around this sort of time. I think he'd won the Royal Rumble the same night as the street fight. But yeah, like there was like a bit of a shortage of stars and stuff, and they needed to start making new people to step up. And man, did they ever do that with this street fight, especially, which probably still to this day is like one of my favorite matches of all time.
It is incredible. Yeah. I think that because when Rocky won the Royal Rumble, like it seemed like he was going to be in an angle with Triple H anyway. So they had like 2 months to build Triple H up as a legit main eventer, because he had won the belt before that in 1999.
Yeah.
Off Mick Foley, I believe.
That's correct.
Because Foley won it at SummerSlam 99, which is one of my favorite pay-per-views, and I think mainly for nostalgia, because it's probably not technically like a great pay-per-view, but like whenever I was a youngster and like seeing that match for the first time, being such a Mankind fan, to see him going in against Austin and Triple H and winning the belt, I'm like, that's incredible. Mm-hmm. I was so happy. Didn't matter that he lost it the day after that to Triple H. Irrelevant. He won it then SummerSlam, and that's all that matters. So, like, Triple H had been like, champion for a little bit, but you kind of find out that like over the summer and then that kind of area, getting close to Christmas time, is always like their kind of teasing out like process, and it's from like January to March or April when they do their big push for WrestleMania, and that's when you see the big players being established and you see the main events turn up. So while Triple H had already had the belt like a couple of months before that, going into the year 2000, going into WrestleMania, they needed to establish like Triple H as some kind of fucking big deal, because The Rock was a big deal already.
Yeah.
And he needed to fight a big deal opponent. And Triple H, nobody was really sure if Triple H was that opponent. So sticking him in there with Mick Foley, some people might say, oh, it's just a way to get, from A to B, from January to WrestleMania. Mm-hmm. But God dang it, if it wasn't some of the best stuff you've ever seen,
Oh yeah.
Like they talk about this in the documentary. But it's also one of the things they would point out and talk about on like those old Foley VHS tapes, talking about where they do the reveal, and it is so well done. It still gives me chills when you see it.
Yeah, same.
It's when Mick Foley's talking about Mankind's not ready to face you this at Royal Rumble, Triple H, and Triple H is all like smirking. He's like, yeah, fuck you. And he's like, but I know a guy who will take his place. And Triple H is like, yeah, whatever the fuck. And then Mick like rips his jacket open.
Yeah.
And it's a Cactus Jack shirt. And it cuts to like Triple H, and he's like, oh shit. Like that is it's so simple and it's so obvious, but it's perfect. Like the way that the camera shots and the reactions and everything is like, that's how you build a match. Because before that, Triple H is like, I don't care about Mankind. He's a goofball. And after that, he was like, I got to take this shit seriously.
Yeah.
Which came across in the match.
Absolutely.
Like during the match, it became very clear that Mick Foley was a threat, or Cactus Jack was a threat, and that Triple H would have to go out of his way to beat him. Which is pretty much exactly what happened. Like, if anybody is listening to this and you haven't seen that match, or the Hell in a Cell match in February, I would highly recommend you go back and watch both of those matches. Definitely watch the Royal Rumble match. Because it is, although I still like the Hell in a Cell match too.
Yeah.
It's just good storytelling, and Mick Foley was the kind of guy who could tell a good story because of his character and because of his reputation, and because pretty much all throughout his career in the WWF especially, he has had this kind of mystique about him where, because he's worked with the right people and he's had the right matches, where like if you don't like totally beat the hell out of him, then he's just gonna keep getting up. He's, you have to go out of your way to beat McFoley. If you can beat McFoley, then you've accomplished something.
Especially so with like the Cactus Jack gimmick as well.
Yeah,
that
it's
was
a
always
lot
presented
easier.
as like his toughest persona almost.
Yeah, exactly. Because Cactus Jack is this had legendary status in Japan and in WCW and ECW before that, as this kind of street fighter, this brawler, the King of the Death Match. Did he win the King of the Death Match?
I can't remember.
He was in it, but I don't know if he won it.
I think he did, yeah.
Well, who else is gonna win it?
Yeah.
He may as well be the king of it. So he had all this like reputation built up, and so this kind of like it seemed like a good way, if Mick Foley were to retire, it seemed like the perfect way to do it. In that he kind of went out, on his back, but he went out like putting up a fight. Those two matches, like he puts up a fight. He's not just like, you wouldn't know that he's been that beaten up and he can barely walk and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. He's especially the street fight with the sort of escalating violence in it as the part that I really enjoyed the most. Is like they bring in like the well, it starts off like just a regular match, almost like them beating the crap out of each other. Then it like spills into the crowd, and then Triple H gets his leg punctured by like a wooden crate, which again it like helps put Triple H over that like situation, because it shows how tough he is to just gut it out, even though he's got this serious injury. But and then getting into the ring and then getting to the barbed wire 2x4 and then eventually the thumbtacks as well. Like it just builds to such a violent crescendo.
Right, but it makes sense.
Yeah, everything makes sense. Like everything leads into the next thing almost. And I guess you can say like a similar thing with the whole Hell in a Cell match as well, where Cactus Jack had been promising to dive off the top of the cell beforehand, but then when the cell comes down, the door's been locked, so he's trapped inside, and he has to kind of figure out a way to get out. And then eventually they get up on top of the cell, and then he takes a fall off and stuff. But yeah, it's just good storytelling, like with those kind of hardcore stipulations. Like people almost talk about hardcore wrestling as garbage wrestling, essentially. Like it has no value almost. And to a certain extent you can look at things like the hardcore title and some of the like matches that they had there. Yeah, you've got a point. Like there's not much rhyme or reason to a lot of what's going on, except for people hitting each other with bowling balls and kendo sticks or whatever. But like these matches, everything meant something, and everything sort of built to make the match better as it went along. So it definitely helps it stand out from that point of view.
I think that's definitely stuff that people are missing these days. Like they don't see the psychology to it. Like you said with the Hell in a Cell match, the Mick Foley had made it very clear that he wanted to get on top of the cell. So for the first part of the match, where they're both locked in the cell, people are like, okay, well, a Hell in a Cell match is still a draw. It's still going to be fun. But then once Mick like throws the steps at Triple H and he misses, catches the cell, knocks a big hole in the side of the cell, the crowd are like, we know what's going to happen next.
Yep.
Because they've already established the rules, they've already made it clear. So like they're like setting things in place, and then the crowd are following along and they're going with it. It's how you build it up, right? It's not just hitting people with stuff for the sake of hitting people with stuff, because after a while it becomes unbelievable. Mick Foley as Mankind has had a background where he was able to take a lot of punishment and put his body through all this stuff. And so when you see that kind of stuff happening to Mick Foley later on in the WWF, it's not unbelievable because that's his character. Like, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If that was The Rock that did all that shit, you'd be like, I don't buy that. This is all gimmicked. This doesn't make any sense. And also, number two, The Rock wouldn't be stupid enough to do half that stuff because he doesn't need to. That's not what The Rock's there for. But Mankind, Mick Foley was there for that specific role, and to make himself look unbeatable, unkillable, because that way, if you can beat him, then you've done something good, and that comes across in the Hell in a Cell like so perfectly when he does the bump. I don't want to, sorry for spoilers for this fucking 20-year-old match, but Triple H does a back body drop to Cactus Jack on the top of the cell, and they gimmick the roof and the ring evidently, so that Cactus Jack falls through the cage a little bit like what he did in his first Hell in a Cell match, but they have the ring gimmicked so that he kind of like falls through the ring, and it looks incredible.
Yeah, it looks great. It
still looks like so good now, but when Triple H climbs down and he sees like Mick Foley trying to get up, like that's it. That's when you're like, he's a zombie, like he's not real. Triple H sells it like that. He's like, how the fuck am I supposed to beat this guy? It's stuff like that. It's perfect and appropriate for the character. And it's not overkill because that's what you have to do to put that guy down. But like if it was somebody else going out and doing their hardcore wrestling, it's not going to work right because it's different if you see a guy like Darby Allin or something, one of those guys doing those kind of moves, because you're like, well, now it feels gimmicked. It doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
It does, it doesn't. And then I feel like people don't have that same level of psychology. They don't build it up. They just go like straight for the tables, which is the worst thing you can do. It's absolutely the worst thing you can do, because the people want tables. They're gonna champ for the tables. You gotta be smart about it. If you give them tables straight away, they're just gonna champ for more tables later on. You're gonna miss your spot. You need to pace stuff out. Even in a hardcore match, you need to figure out how things move. And I think that's definitely a lost art. And I think Mick Foley's probably the best at that kind of thing. He didn't make it look like hardcore wrestling so much as he made it look like a fight.
Yeah.
Like you really have to beat him up, and you have to use sledgehammers and chairs and thumbtacks and shit to keep this guy down, because he'll just keep coming back if you don't kill him. So a very, very, a very big fan of those two matches. And then, the point of the little documentary was to not just to look back on a great time. Yeah, great. Remember that time I pedigreed you in the thumbtacks? Great time. But also to kind of like, that was the turning point for Triple H. Like we were saying, that was the bit that got Triple H over.
100%, yeah.
He was a guy, he was rising up the card. He was a name. He was clearly like, getting a push. But working with Mick Foley like that, it wasn't just the fact that he beat him. It was the whole program that Triple H was able to do everything he could to Mankind. He on Cactus Jack, and then he could retire him as well. Like all of it falling into place was really like, that's what got Triple H over as a heel. That's what definitely made him, a name, and that's why he was able to kind of keep the pressure on and be smart about it and keep, being champion for another 68 billion times, and I feel like it's very similar to what Mankind did with The Rock the year before that, because in late 1998, The Rock was getting over with the people, and they figured we'll do the old bait and switch, which is where we were watching Survivor Series 98, and it reminded me of this whole scenario where Mankind was being obviously pointed to as McMahon's heel flunky who was going to win the championship in this tournament, and The Rock was being pegged as the people's champion who was slowly becoming more and more loved by the fans and getting over. And he was an enemy of Vince McMahon. So at the pay-per-view, they do the old bait and switch where the double turn, as it were, where The Rock is now a heel and Mankind is now a face. And Rock as a heel is really good. You know, Rocky's is good as both a heel and a face because he's so good. He's so fucking good. But he needed something. He needed something to really make people take notice of him, you know? And working with Mankind over the couple of months from January to WrestleMania is what got Rocky like noticed.
Absolutely. There's like halftime heat, empty arena match, and the I Quit match as well at the Royal Rumble.
Oh my goodness, that I Quit match.
Spectacular.
Oh, it is, yeah. But good God, Mick Foley gets his ass kicked.
Yeah, big time.
And again, like that's kind of the point. All of that makes sense because number one, you have to beat up Mick Foley to really like prove if you want to get pie, you have to beat Mick Foley, and it's no easy task beating Mick Foley.
Mm-hmm.
But also the fact that the gimmick was that Mick Foley didn't say I quit. It was clearly like a little tape of Mick saying it from like a week before in a promo because The Rock had beat him to a pulp and he couldn't talk. But like, Mankind didn't say I quit. That boosts his own gimmick. It boosts The Rock's gimmick as a heel because look at what he did to Mankind. All of that just made both of them look great. Even though Mick Foley lost and got the shit kicked out of him, which he undoubtedly did, like he still looked great because he still stayed true to the character that they'd established. And the same with The Rock. The Rock was this horrible, like, confident, cocky, swaggery heel. And he proved it by going out and doing that to Mick Foley. And that's what got him ready to fight Steve Austin at WrestleMania. It's the same build with one of the same people in it 2 years in a row, but it's really it makes sense. It's good storytelling.
Yeah.
And it shows you just how good all the people involved were, and how good Mick Foley was at like being able to put people over, and how good Triple H and The Rock were for being able to take the ball and run with it. And it's the kind of thing you don't really see anymore these days. There's like nobody on the show they have that can put people over like that and give it that much legitimacy. Because we were talking about this and about how, Roman Reigns went over Brock Lesnar at whatever the fuck it was. Was it WrestleMania? When was it?
Well, he went up against Brock Lesnar, and it looked like he was going to beat him at WrestleMania. I can't remember what it was now. WrestleMania 31 or something like that. It's basically a few years ago, but then they kind of chickened out and had Seth Rollins cash in the Money in the Bank instead, which kind of undercut Roman Reigns' big moment, and I guess he never really recovered from it, really. Like, he was in a weird sort of position then anyway, because he was already being pushed so hard that a lot of fans were kind of rebelling against that and not, convinced by him as like a main eventer, or at least like as the face of the company. So I don't know if that reaction kind of put them off and made them decide to go in a different direction with Seth Rollins instead. But the fact that, they tried for so long to kind of build this Roman Reigns Brock Lesnar match and then chickened out of giving it a decisive finish for a couple of years, because it was, I think it was about 2 or 3 years later when they had their rematch at WrestleMania, but by which point it was kind of too late, really.
Right. But also, Seth Rollins beat Brock Lesnar, but he doesn't get that like Brock Lesnar rub because he didn't work a program of Lesnar. Do you know what I mean? Like, yes, technically you can say that Seth Rollins beat Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania, but he was cashing in his Money in the Bank thing. Brock Lesnar was already pretty beat up, like after having gone through a big match, Like, it does, he doesn't get the proper rub of beating up on Brock Lesnar because he wasn't able to work an angle with Brock Lesnar. If you were to have an angle where, like, say either Seth Rollins or Roman Reigns were the one guy that Brock Lesnar couldn't beat, that would look incredible. Because suddenly Brock Lesnar's on the back foot. Here's the guy who's run roughshod over the entire company for years and years, beating up everybody. But if he is one person he just can't beat, and he gets frustrated about it, like, there's your money.
Yeah.
And Roman Reigns is the kind of guy who could pull that off. And if he was just, like, always the thorn in Brock Lesnar's side, if Brock Lesnar could beat up everybody else, but he couldn't beat Roman Reigns is going to look like a fucking house on fire.
Exactly.
But they don't work like... Well, Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar did work a long-term feud, but, like, Roman never got that kind of rub and never got that kind of shine from Brock Lesnar. And I don't know if it was just because of the ways the storylines developed or of the results of the storylines, but it means that just being a big name by itself isn't enough to put somebody over.
Yeah.
Because whenever Brock Lesnar, or whenever Roman Reigns eventually did beat Brock Lesnar, right? Like, nobody cared.
Yeah, exactly.
But also, before that, Triple H and Roman Reigns were doing an angle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this was stupid because Triple H just came out of nowhere, and then kind of became the champion, and then they fought at WrestleMania. They didn't really have like 2 months of, like, good solid storyline. They had
I think there was a little bit.
Right, they had 2 months where they would dip in and out.
Yeah.
And they would kind of talk about this and they would kind of talk about that. But it wasn't the kind of thing that, like, Triple H and Mankind did, where, like, every week they were trying to one-up each other or talk about, and have those 2 matches that were incredible. But, like, they had all this stuff. In those 2 months, like, they packed in a lot of storyline. Whereas with Roman Reigns and Triple H, there wasn't that much proper interaction. They didn't make Triple H look like that much more of a badass going into the storyline, so that when Roman Reigns beat him, you're like, well, nice, man, you beat a guy who's 5 years past his prime. Like, what good is that? It's like whenever The Miz was champion, I'm gonna take an opportunity to slag off The Miz. Never miss it. And going into WrestleMania, they had him feud with Jerry Lawler.
Yeah.
What? Jesus Christ, what the fuck was that about?
I don't know.
And, like, I'm not knocking the King. I think the King's an incredible worker. He's one of the best. Like, as a wrestler, he's so good. Like, not technically, but, like, as a worker.
Yeah, I think the little things. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. The Miz, not so much. But, like, who in, like, 2010 or whenever that was? I think it was 2010, was it?
Must have been, yeah.
Like, who is gonna, at that point in time, who is gonna look at the King and say, you're a credible heavyweight champion contender, given that we've seen you sitting by the announcer's desk for the last 15 or 20 years, right? Not that you haven't had matches in between then, and not that you haven't had matches outside of WWE, which you definitely have, but we have seen nothing that in the company that would necessitate you having a heavyweight championship match. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So therefore, if The Miz beats Jerry Lawler, like, that should be a big deal because Jerry Lawler is a legend in the business, and he's a multiple-time world champion, and he's incredible. But The Miz doesn't get the rub for beating it because the storyline and the circumstances around it don't make any sense. So, like, what's the big deal? It doesn't matter. It's just another guy, and it's even worse because here's an old guy who definitely is past his prime, and because what age was he then?
Oh, geez.
60 something?
Probably late 50s, I would have thought. It was about 10 years ago, yeah.
Right, like, Jerry Lawler's way past his prime by that point.
Yeah, he'd have a heart attack in the ring, like, not long after.
Right, because of The Miz and how shitty he was, I assume.
Yeah.
He had a heart attack. He's like, I work with that guy? Oh, my God. But Like it doesn't have the rub to it, because while one of the people involved is a big name and has credibility, the storyline doesn't make sense. It wasn't built up right, and the circumstances around it weren't right. So like it really is just all about building a good coherent storyline between two talented individuals.
Yeah.
You can't just have one guy turn up and go, what do you think of this guy? But it's like with Goldberg. It's exactly like with Goldberg. You can't just have Goldberg turn up and be Goldberg, because like when was the last time he did any of this shit? There's no precedent for it. There's no good, like, beating Dolph Ziggler in 7 seconds at SummerSlam doesn't count, because it's just out of nowhere. It's just a random thing that happened. But if they built up a proper storyline with Goldberg and made you care and reminded you and showed you what he could do and what he's going to do and all of this stuff, and then built him up as a credible threat instead of just having him show up,
Yeah.
just him being a name isn't good enough in wrestling. And we shouldn't be the ones having to point this out over and over again.
I wonder if this is because you sometimes hear about people saying that WWE aren't so much interested in creating stars anymore. They want WWE itself to be like the star of the show. So the theory, I guess, being that if a star goes down injured, or he gets offered a Hollywood movie or whatever and disappears for a time, then the company is still strong enough that it can survive and prosper without them. But like that whole philosophy kind of backfires, because they haven't really built like a new top star in so long. Like if you look back over the last 10 years or so, probably longer really, but like there hasn't been a match or a moment like the whole Triple H Cactus Jack feud, which elevated someone into that position and got them into a place where they can become like the face of the company or whatever. And because they don't have that person standing up and drawing crowds and selling merchandise and all that kind of thing, then it's probably a big reason why like ratings have been like gradually getting lower and lower, and general interest has been sort of fading for a long time as well.
Exactly. Like it's such a mistake to market the company as a brand instead of the wrestlers, because that was part of the criticism ECW used to get. Was that a lot of the time people were, they chant for ECW, they wouldn't chant for the wrestlers, they chant for the company.
Yeah.
And that diminishes the role that the wrestlers had in the company. They're the ones that make you want to watch the show. But it turned into like every time a hardcore thing happens, people chant ECW, because people don't remember the stars of ECW anymore. They remember the violence, which is a bad angle, because ECW wasn't all about the violence. So again, what we're talking about, there was usually there was more psychology to ECW, and it wasn't as crazy and hardcore as people remember. Not all the time, evidently, but usually, there's more to it than meets the eye. But if you put the brand over the people, the workers, you're going to get in trouble, because then, and you could argue that's exactly what's happened to the WWE right now, is that if you do prioritize the brand over the workers, then it doesn't matter who's on top. Then it's just all nonsense. But that surely, to me, like that flies in the face of logic, because if it doesn't matter who's on top, then like it has to matter who's on top, because it's a wrestling show. You need to have a star or an entertainer or someone who's good at what they do to be on top, to make people interested in watching the show. But if that person is interchangeable, then it doesn't matter. There's no reason to watch the show,
Yeah, because you don't have like an emotional connection to a company. You have an emotional connection to people, and like the people or the superstars who kind of, deliver the promos or have the feuds which you can get invested in, the ones you want to get behind. Like I kind of look at Daniel Bryan as a guy who has defied like the WWE's logic system for the last decade. Like the way that in the face of like a lot of really shitty booking and like them not really having much faith in him, he still managed to like become super popular and become such a huge name in the business. Is well because he's incredibly talented at what he does, but B, he's just he hasn't had that one sort of match or moment, but he's kind of just found that emotional connection with the crowd and kind of said, screw you guys, I'm not to the fans but to WWE, I'm just gonna keep doing my thing and then keep getting popular because of it. So yeah, you almost wish that more people would sort of take the bull by the horns and because I guess there's only so much you can do in a big public company like WWE. You can't really go too far against like the Vince McMahon's vision or whatever, but still, like, if you're allowed to connect with audiences and give them something that they want to see, they're going to keep coming back and want to spend their money and tune into the show every week. So
well, exactly, like that's the fucking point. That's the point of wrestling, is that you have your favorite and you have the one guy who you want to see win and you have one guy that you want to see lose. That's exactly the point. If all the heels and all the faces are interchangeable and you just want to watch good guy versus bad guy, then it's meaningless. But if you have The Rock versus Triple H, then suddenly wow, The Rock's cool. I like The Rock. I want to see him win. And then if Triple H wins, it's going to be through some kind of evil, underhanded tactics that only Triple H can come up with. And then you're like, oh, that evil Triple H, I want to see him get his comeuppance. I want to see The Rock win. That's why you keep tuning in, because you get invested in these people and the characters, and you want to see them win or lose. But if they're all interchangeable, then who fucking cares?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand that mindset at all. Plus, who gives a fuck if they decide to go to fucking Hollywood, right? John Cena made that company a shit ton of money. Hulk Hogan made them a shit ton of money. Steve Austin made them a shit ton of money. The Rock made them a shit ton of money. And if he turns up every so often, will continue to make them shit tons of money. I don't get why they wouldn't want that. Like, who gives a shit if in 5 years he goes to Hollywood? You've had 5 years of making money off that guy. Yeah. Isn't that the fucking point? Wouldn't they rather have, surely right now, they would rather have Steve Austin money coming in than like whatever Seth Rollins money. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's not a knock on Seth Rollins. But I'm saying if you can make Seth Rollins into a character as high profile and as interested to the fans as Rock or Austin, they're going to sell that or John Cena, they're going to sell that amount of merchandise. They're going to get more interest in the company. That money is going to be, it's way more than they're making now, surely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so we right? It's frustrating that we have to point this shit out. Like, how do you not understand this? It's your company, and you've done this a billion times before. You need one really good heel, you need one really good face, you need one backup of each of them, and then the rest of the shit's gonna sell itself. It's not rocket science, right? You work backwards. You establish those two things, and the way you establish those things isn't by just fucking around with random matches or stupid matches against legends or illogical booking. It's through good character work, good promo work, and good storyline work. And you can say you're the best wrestler in the world, but who's going to give a shit if Dolph Ziggler wrestles whoever the fuck next week for the heavyweight championship? Nobody, because Dolph Ziggler, as great as a wrestler as he is, has been dicked over by plenty of stupid storylines that don't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
There's no consistency. Even Steve Austin used to get screwed out of the belt all the time. He lost a lot, but that wasn't the point. The point was the storyline was he was being screwed out of the belt by Vince McMahon. That was the story, is that Austin couldn't win because of somebody else, and so Austin wanted A, become heavyweight champion, and B, get his revenge on the person who kept screwing him over. You know what I mean? Mick Foley doing all the stuff that he did, all the storylines that he did, like he always had good, interesting, character-driven storylines that he could develop with like The Undertaker and with The Rock and with Triple H and with Kane, and you know, like there were storylines there. They weren't just like today Mick Foley fights a dude. It was like today Mick Foley has pissed off The Undertaker and The Undertaker wants revenge. You know, stuff happened. It meant stuff. It meant that there was a reason why they would fight at the pay-per-view.
Whereas like today, it's all about there's no patience in it. Almost, it's almost like they just like run out the same match like time and time again, and like trade wins back and forth. Like, I mean, look at the Roman Reigns versus King Corbin feud that dragged on forever. Like, they had a bunch of matches that kind of went nowhere, and and it didn't really do either one of them any favors as well. So they just kind of run it into the ground and then keep running it some more because they don't know when to stop. And I don't know, it seems so weird that it's the same company being run by the same guy, and how they've gone so backwards over the last like 20 years in terms of, you know, creating stories which engaging and which people want to watch. And I don't know if that's, you know, a symptom of the fact that they kind of brought in all these kind of Hollywood writers or not, because you don't want to like put too much blame on the writing staff, because ultimately it's Vince McMahon's vision, and you hear all the time about how he's the guy who's constantly ripping up a show and like starting from scratch, like as the show's going on pretty much. So ultimately it's Vince who makes those final creative decisions and stuff. But yeah, it's so weird that I don't know, he just doesn't seem to understand like wrestling anymore, or he's trying to push for something that isn't working.
But that's you're entirely right, because you know, we're talking about these storylines from back in 2000, and we're talking about, you know, characters back then. But not only are the characters no longer as big as they used to be, but the storylines aren't there either, like you were saying, because what was the most interesting storyline in the WWE have done this year?
Otis and Mandy Rose.
Right, but like, and again, no offense to either of them, but who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
Like,
it's like an undercard story, essentially.
Right. And if that's the best they can do, like, why aren't these other guys being involved in better storylines? Like, the Bray Wyatt character is great, right? I love the character. I love the Fiend. I love all of that. But he hasn't been any good storylines.
No.
He's been in matches, and he fought for the heavyweight championship and he won. But there's never a good storyline to go in and out of that. And that's one of the reasons why I've been interested in the Braun Strowman thing, because at least they told a good. That's why I like the hype package before their match at Money in the Bank, because it hinted at the possibility of a good story being right there.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say that they're going to knock the house down with an amazing wrestling match, but I'm saying if that company was smart, they could build a very good storyline out of those two guys right there. And I don't think they're going to do it.
No.
I think that's going to be the closest we're going to get. Seth Rollins is doing some interesting stuff where he's like, I'm the Messiah, I'm whatever. That's good character stuff. But where's that going to go? It hasn't gone anywhere so far. Like, you know, how much further can it go? And it can only go anywhere is if they have him in a meaningful storyline with, you know, people who threaten his image and vision, right? But if they don't do that and he just flip-flops as he always does, then no one's going to give a shit. And this is going to be forgotten in 6 months when he turns into a face again. Like, none of this shit makes any sense, which I suppose is apropos for the podcast. But, like, it's, like, I think that's part of the big problem. they're trying to establish characters, but they're not sticking with it, and um they're not giving us good storylines.
Yeah.
And that's what people need. They need to be engaged. If it's a random guy every week, then nobody cares. And if it's a month long, like you said, that fucking Baron Corbin, Roman Reigns thing, right? That went on
Hmm.
for months. But who cares? Nobody cared because the stakes weren't there. And if the stakes aren't there, then what fucking good is it? It's no good. Neither of them give a shit about each other, right?
Yeah.
In the feud, they were like, I don't like you and you don't like me, so let's fight. Like there was nothing.
Well, I mean, I guess you could say they tried doing something with the whole dog food thing, but even then, that was just meh. Like, it didn't really matter at all. It didn't hurt Roman Reigns when he had dog food poured on him, or, you know, it didn't really seem to affect him in the long run at all.
No,
So,
exactly. Like there's no long term like planning and shit like that for any of this stuff. And I think
mhm.
if there was, it would make a world of difference. But at the moment, they don't have any of that. And I think that's why you'll never see something like Mankind versus Triple H again. And for the record, those guys had a hell of a fucking feud. Not just that, but like they were all through '97 or a lot of the way through '97 they would
Yeah,
fight.
yeah,
Um, like I gotta say, I always thought that those two guys worked so well together.
absolutely.
I used to hear that there was heat between Triple H and McFoley back in the day. Dude, if that is true, then you would never know by watching them wrestle because they were like tailor made for each other somehow.
Mm,
I don't know how, but they always worked well together. I don't think I've ever seen a bad Triple H versus McFoley match. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And I've seen a bunch. And there's probably some that are like, it's not as good as the other ones. Fair enough, but there's never been one where you're like, well, that sucked. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but that's why you don't get that shit these days. Is because not just because the characters aren't there, because sometimes the characters are there. I really think it's just because of like long-term storyline planning and understanding the characters themselves.
Yeah.
Like you can have a character, but if that doesn't go anywhere else within the realms of everybody else, then it's not going to work.
You got
Um,
to put them in the right situation to succeed as well. Like Triple H and Cactus Jack in that street fight and that Hell in a Cell match, that was the exact right situation that they both kind of thrived in and
mhm.
were able to tell like a good story in. Whereas, if they have like a similar sort of situation now, like 9 times out of 10, it's not the right situation. It's a match or a gimmick or something which doesn't make sense or isn't utilized very well, or I don't know, it just doesn't really click with the types of performance put in the match itself. So
Right.
there's just like all these little things where like they're just not really playing to anyone's strengths.
Yeah, it's maddening, isn't it?
It really is.
And I think it's almost made worse when you go back and watch these old like documentary things like the Triple H Mankind one, and you're like, man, I don't want to sound like one of those fucking nostalgia guys like, well, everything was way better back in my day, because as we all know, the Attitude Era wasn't perfect by any
Hmm.
stretch of the imagination. But god dang it, they could write storylines, and they can't now. Like that's not nostalgia talking. That's just us having watched wrestling for a long time, and like the Rusev, Bobby Lashley, Lana thing, right?
Yeah.
That was a storyline, and that was going somewhere, and that involved two people, and that could have been great. But like the it's like what you were saying. The some of the pieces are there, but not all of them. And if you
Mm,
lose some of the pieces, the jigsaw's not going to look right. And that's
exactly.
exactly what happened here, right? They the wheels fell off near the end of it. So like whether we as longtime fans liked it or not didn't matter because other people were talking about it. This actually got press and people were talking about the storyline. which is shit that usually they fucking beg for. People were talking about this storyline, and then they just kind of like whatevered it, and Rusev didn't look very good coming out of it, and for a while Bobby Lashley didn't either, because they didn't do anything with him. I'm like, well, your problem was you didn't blow off the storyline properly, because if you had of, people would have remembered.
Yeah.
And then after that, you wouldn't have to fucking forget about Lashley or Rusev, because they would have been made men. If you blow it off properly, that sounds weird out of context. If the feud is ended correctly, strongly, in the right way that people remember it, then you've got your 2 stars right there.
Exactly.
And if you botch it up, then in 2 months' time, people aren't going to give a shit. Which is why Bobby Lashley's only really coming back into the fray now in May. You know, gunning for a championship opportunity in June, when he should have been like, they should have kept the pressure on him. You know, like if they want Lashley to be the new big bad heel, fucking stick with it and do it right. But don't half-ass it and drop in and out of it, because then nobody's gonna buy Lashley as a heel, because they're like, who? Oh, this guy, I forgot about him.
Yeah.
Don't like say what you want about Triple H, but god dang it, in 2000, one thing Triple H did not do is let you forget about him.
Yeah.
Fucker was all over TV. You know what I mean? And you grew to hate him, and some of it was go away hate, and some of it was legitimate hate. But you fucking hated him because he was good at what he did, and he was in good storylines with the right people. You know, him against Jericho, and him against The Rock, and him against Stone Cold. All of that shit was interesting, and it wasn't interesting just because Triple H was a good character. It was because all of the pieces fit.
Yes.
Right. I think that's what we're saying. God, you know, sometimes we sound really smart.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Sometimes it all comes together, and we're geniuses, you know.
It sounds like we planned this out as well, when we definitely didn't.
Some of it does sound like we've written this, but no, we're just that good. You see, WWE, if you would like to hire us to be your writers and to come up with storylines for you, we accept. However, we have a very, very high salary.
Yep.
That you will need to match. It's imperative, because we're gonna give you the quality, we're gonna give you the good shit, but you gotta pay for that. Like, you're gonna make a lot of money off of us. We want to see that money back.
Oh, they might get into a bidding war with AEW and Impact as well. Like, I hear everyone's sort of interested in our booking philosophies.
I think All Elite Wrestling are too busy. They have like 800 cooks in the kitchen at the same time at the moment. They don't need us. They're coming up with their own great storylines. What about Chris Jericho versus a drone?
Yeah.
Winning combination, you know. They've got all their shit planned out. Don't worry about that. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanna say about this topic before we wrap things up?
Not really. I mean, we've kind of covered all the things I wanted to talk about. Like, we've been saying, they just haven't really made any new stars in so long. Like, probably going back to CM Punk and John Cena was like the last time that they actually did that. And when you consider that was like 2011 that
2011.
CM Punk had that whole storyline, which, you know, it perpetually put him over, because he still gets CM Punk chance like to this day. But I mean, why can't they do that sort of thing with anyone else? I just don't know.
But that's exactly what we're talking about. It's two of the right guys, John Cena, CM Punk, both incredible wrestlers. Both can talk, both can make you want to watch them fight each other. But they also had a great storyline going into it.
Yeah.
Where John Cena was the face of the company, and CM Punk wanted to be the face of the company, and then he wanted to leave with the belt. You know, then you have stakes. Then you want to see, you know, if you're a John Cena fan, you want to see John Cena overcome the odds and beat CM Punk, this young upstart. But the fans of Punk, who were numerous, and we're right there, also had the stakes where they wanted to see Punk win and fuck away off, which is what he did. Therefore, like, that's a huge storyline. Forget the fact that, you know, that storyline didn't really end the way it was supposed to. Because they were able to keep the pressure on Punk for the most part. Like, again, like, Punk was a guy who was in the company for a while, but they needed to test him out with something big. And that was the big thing. Much like Triple H going up against Mankind. He needed something big. against the right opponent with the right storyline. And that was what the CM Punk John Cena thing was. All of the different combinations came together at one, and that's why people still talk about those guys. The storyline was good, but also the characters were good. It all made sense, and there were stakes involved. It's all of those things that you don't see anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree. That probably was like the last big like storyline, because since then they haven't been able to connect all of those dots in one match, and that's their problem, in my opinion. You know, it's not just that. I mean, they have a lot of problems, but I think that's their biggest one, is that they don't connect all of the dots when they should do.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. I like how I've made it seem very childish by talking about, connecting dots and putting jigsaw pieces into place. Probably a little bit more, strategic than that. But I feel like that's a good analogy. People understand what I'm saying when I say that stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I would agree with you there, in that CM Punk John Cena probably the last time something good like that happened, because it involved all of the shit we're talking about, and you don't see that no more, Cut to like 10 years later when we see the CM Punk John Cena documentary.
Yeah, well, it's it shouldn't be too far away, I'm sure.
Well, Punk's probably got something to say about that, but yeah, so I guess we can wrap this one up. If anybody else out there, if you've seen the Triple H Mick Foley documentary, let us know, or let us know if you've seen those matches all the way through. If you haven't, check them out, let us know what you think of them, because we're big fans of those. And so thanks a lot for listening, guys. We will see you in the next Wrestling Doesn't Make Sense video. Thanks very much.